everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on a specific questions why so many AI implementations are failing to provide promised benefit. We get this topic from Mr. Rob, so hopefully from next week we will get more interesting topic from our think tank. So, we have our world famous speaker, Mr. Donald and Mr. Rob Enderley. Mr. Donald, what you want to discuss about this question? Why so many AI implementation are failing to provide promised benefit?
Well, I think the way to start is ask the question of who is making the promises. And I think I know I've been around the tech industry long enough to know that the people who make the promises and the people who make the software are not the same people. And it's really useful for people to be able, if you're a salesperson, there's a Dilbert cartoon, and I don't like Scott Adams. Dilbert was generally kind of mean, and he turned out to be sort of a jerk. But nonetheless, there was a Scott Adams cartoon that captures this absolutely perfectly. There was an engineer and a salesman talking to each other, and the salesman says, "Well, we promised that this will do." And he gives this long list of wonderful things that this product will supposedly do. And then Dilbert says to the salesman, he said, "Well, our software actually doesn't do any of those things. Do you know what this means?" And the salesman said, "Yeah, it means that I'm a good salesman and you're a lousy engineer." So basically, people have been just promising things that don't have anything to do with what artificial intelligence can actually do. And it can do a lot of wonderful, wonderful things. And in some ways, and it's evolving. So for instance, one of the biggest problems with artificial intelligence, large language models for using them for things like writing papers and things like that is hallucinations. So what they do is that a good example is a lawyer decided that he was going to use ChatGPT to write a legal brief. So boy, it just wrote this very well written legal brief with case citations and the whole bit, and he handed it to the judge, and the judge started looking at it and, "Well, I've never seen these cases before." And so he gave it to his clerk and, "Go, well, look these cases up for me." And the cases were just made up. ChatGPT wanted to have a nice, well-written legal brief. So it just made things up. And that's a very, very difficult problem to solve, because when you look at the media these days, like you look at Twitter, especially Twitter has gotten to be a sewer, and you'll read something where somebody, maybe an important sounding person, an ex-president, says something, just makes a claim about something that's true or not true, and they say it in this, in this very confident tone of voice, or tone of typing in the case of X or Twitter, and it's not true at all. Well, how do you know? How do you know whether something's true at all? I mean, even scientific journals occasionally will print something that turns out to not be true. The person who wrote the paper might be falsifying data or things like that. I mean, people don't do that very often because it's suicide if you get caught. And but nonetheless, that does happen. So we don't really know how to program software so that we can make sure that it's always accurate, because we don't know how to even check our own stuff or our own thoughts to make sure they're always accurate. So that's, AI is good at a lot of things, but that's not one of the things that it's good at. So for an instance, but where that extrapolates is, let's just say that you're trying to do medical diagnoses, or you're trying to, or beyond a diagnosis, you're trying to help this person actually come into some sort of an action plan of what they can do to manage some sort of a disease or something like that. Well, if you're not 100 absolutely sure as you could possibly be that every fact that it's using to make those decisions is accurate, then you're in danger of having the AI tell you to do something that's wrong. So just looking in that one aspect of it, and I'll explain a little bit more about why that is in AI, but I'd really love to hear what Rob has to say about this. So I'm going to shut up for a while.
Thank you. Mr. Rob Wenderly, what you want to discuss about this question?
Well, so a recent survey indicated about 10% of the AI projects are successful, 90% are not. I think it really comes down to the fact that this technology is moving very quickly. The channel isn't really trained in it. The OEMs aren't really trained in it, yet everybody's rushing to bring product to market. And what they're doing is they're using the shotgun approach. And instead of looking at a list of things that have to be done and accepting the fact that all of the things in the list have to be done, they're playing multiple choice and choosing out the things that they enjoy doing and leaving out the things that they don't enjoy doing. And we kind of saw this coming with IBM Watson. With IBM Watson, they brought it up. It tested well. Tested really well in medical. Tested all right in legal. The problem that emerged real quickly was the training cost was exorbitant. The training cost was several times what the hardware cost was, hardware and software cost was, and so people came in with the idea that their cost of deploying Watson was going to be that software and hardware cost, not really realizing that those costs were a fraction of the total. Not to mention, it takes a while to spin up the training sets and implement them. So instead of being able to bring in a piece of hardware, plug it in, and have it working, you paid your money, then you paid a ton more money and used a ton more time to actually get the thing to work properly. And companies didn't budget for it. And the end result is that Watson didn't do all that well. I mean, in terms of trials, in terms of demonstrations, it was phenomenal. In terms of actual implementation, because of the training cost, it wasn't effective, and that's carried forward to generative AI today. The training cost of a large language model is running at about $100 million at the moment. Now, what we've learned is that you can break the LLMs down into SLMs, small language models, and one LLM can create a bunch of SLMs relatively cheaply, and then you aggregate the SLMs on a particular task, and you create what is kind of a virtual large language model that's better focused at a lower price. But the only company that knows how to do that at the moment is NVIDIA, and NVIDIA is hardly the only company in market that is trying to sell AI. And what NVIDIA did differently, and why they're successful, and why they're trending to be the most valuable company in the world. They're chasing Apple and Microsoft at the moment, but expected to pass them either this quarter or next, is because they did all of the above. They actually put a lot of focus on the training side of the technology to bring the cost down. So once the technology is deployed, it actually works. And the NVIDIA stuff is working surprisingly well. Positive reports out of BMW, positive reports out of a variety of companies, including Siemens, who I used to work for, in terms of being able to have AI projects that are not only functional, but highly profitable, but largely due to NVIDIA's influence. Even if you go over to Hewlett Packard, they just launched a series of AI products. They're the only ones that I know of that went to NVIDIA first and said, hey, what should we build, rather than building it and figuring that whatever, kind of back to Donald's example, that somehow sales and engineering would figure out how to actually deliver what was being promised by marketing. And that just doesn't work. You can't, while it's important to have marketing, sales and engineering integrated, if marketing or sales gets too far over their skis, the end result is going to be a lot of really dissatisfied and upset customers. And that's kind of what we're dealing with AI at the moment. The people that are customer facing, the OEMs, the folks that provide the services, they're not trained yet. They don't understand this technology yet they're selling the hell out of it. And customers don't understand this technology yet, and they don't know how to implement it. And they're going to these OEMs for advice, and these OEMs are acting like they're experts, but they're not. They don't understand it yet. Now this will get solved in the next couple of years, but the whole industry is going to crater. But at the moment, we've got a huge problem with the fact that the real knowledge with AI exists in two companies. Companies have been working on it for decades, and that's NVIDIA and IBM. IBM's solution is very monolithic. It's very costly, but it is complete. NVIDIA's solution is much more of a multi-vendor solution. Both solutions are relatively open, though it kind of depends on your definition of open. But the end result is the ecosystem that NVIDIA needs, that supports NVIDIA, is at this moment largely untrained, which makes the best practice going directly to NVIDIA and starting with them when you've got a project and using their expertise to guide you through the partnership and solutions experience, because those partners don't know this stuff yet, and their advice as a result is going to be poor. And the result is going to be substandard. Now, it's interesting to note that, as I say, we kind of saw this coming with Watson. We knew that there was going to be a huge training problem coming up, and as I say, NVIDIA spun up products like Omniverse to address that training problem, and they went all in on machine learning, on deep learning, passing machine learning rather rapidly because the cost of machine learning is, because it requires a lot of data science, is very high. And if you were watching, you just saw Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, pop up and say, if you're planning on going to school to be a programmer, don't. The coding is going to be done by AIs, and for the most part, at NVIDIA, that's where the coding is being done now is by AIs. The programmers and coders are coming up with the concepts, but the AI is doing the work. And this is something else to look for when you're buying an AI solution from someone. Ask how they're using it themselves, and if they don't know or they're not using it themselves, then it's not ready. The example I had was back in the days of Gerstner, where somebody cornered Gerstner and says, if IBM's technology is as good as you say it is, why isn't IBM using it? And his response was, at the time, well, would you rather have me deploy my technology internally or deploy it for customers who need it more? And why was that even a choice? I mean, the thing is if it's that good, of course IBM should be deploying it. I mean, if the promises of saving 80% or 60% were valid promises, then it would make a ton of sense for IBM to deploy it first. But IBM didn't deploy it first because a lot of the stuff that IBM was selling at that time didn't work, which is why IBM was in the toilet. So really, you start off with asking the vendor that's pitching you an AI solution, how are you using it yourself? How integrated is AI into your operations? How intimate are you with the requirements that you have and the solution that you're providing? And if you get something anywhere close to what Gerstner's response was of, either or, we could either use it on ourselves or use it on you, your answer should be, well, I want you to use it on you first, because I don't want you experimenting on my dollar, which is exactly what's kind of happening with a lot of these deployments. The vendor is learning AI on your nickel, on your site. And that's an expensive way to learn for you. It's a real cheap way for the vendor to learn, but it's not a good practice. So the underlying issue right now with AI is the ecosystem is not ready for it, not even a little bit. There are two vendors that you can argue are fully understand artificial intelligence, understand how to deploy it, understand how to make it successful. And yeah, it's expensive to do it right. It always is expensive. But when a vendor comes to you and provides you with a cheap AI solution, just be really clear that they understand what the hell it is they're selling, and they're so bought in that they're using it themselves. If either of those conditions aren't in place, then yeah, that low cost they are promising is a falsehood. It won't be low; it'll be very expensive because they're going to be learning on your site. You're going to be paying their training bill, and remember, we're talking about training bills that run into the millions. You don't want that. You want somebody that's working with you that is more expert than you are. And the problem right now is Often they aren't.
Thank you. Mr. Donald, my next question to you, how do issues like data quality and availability contribute to the underperformance of AI system?
Sorry, could you ask that one more time? My speaker was a little down.
How do issues like data quality and availability contribute to the underperformance of AI system?
Well, that goes back to what I was saying in the first place, because let's just say you're doing medical you want to come up and with a medical system, and I want to say, just as a side note, that we must look at really different things, because I looked it up, and Watson is generally given as an example of Watson's medical system is generally given in what I read as an example of something that failed. And the reason that it failed was because Watson was very, very, very good at doing Jeopardy, but it's used as an example of the difficulty of generalizing. Just because you've trained an AI system to do one thing very well does not mean that training is going to go into anything that's even microscopically different. I mean, it's good for exactly what you trained it for, and really nothing else. And that's I see this, discussed in AI journals all the time. I mean, it's like kind of, at least in the technical era, it's some part of it. It's really huge, and to make sure people understand the scale of these things. If there's like a trillion variables that are used for each word or each string in a large language model, that's a lot. And in order to have enough language for it to do any good, you have to have a lot of language. In fact, that's one of the main reasons that this stuff does work, is because we've got as well as it does, is because we've got so much data. But if you're, say, in the example of doing medical diagnosis, or you want to, diagnosis or prescriptions, some sort of things like that, you're only as good as your training data. And if you just go out to the internet, you can find, people who, claim that ivermectin will cure COVID, and, they've got the coconut oil colonoscopies will cure lupus or whatever. I mean, there's every single solitary weird theory with no empirical basis whatsoever that you could possibly imagine for any subject whatsoever. So if you're training your models with bad data, then you're going to wind up with a model that gives you undesirable results. In other words, it'll actually recommend things that it learned and it knows, and it's in there. It's been trained. The model's been trained to do it, but it's wrong. And so how we can make sure that the training sets are 100% reliable it's an open question. I mean, we don't know the answer to that, because it goes back to what I said in the first place, which is, how do we know that something's accurate or not? I mean, how is that possible? And if Sharif, you've written many peer-reviewed papers, and that the process of peer review is pretty tedious. I mean, it takes a long time, and people come back and forth, and they find little nitpicky things and things like that. And that's just a 10-page paper. And I mean, when you're looking at the kind of size of the data sets they're using to train these models, they're in the billions of pages. And so you can't very well have do peer review on 1 billion pages in any sort of finite amount of time. So basically it's artificial intelligence. There are some things that it's really good at, and there's some things it's not that good at. And I also want to just support, second what Rob was saying about the cost, because the large language models that they make at someplace like Google, they have things the size of basketball courts, or multiple, large, with racks stacked up to, as tall as people can easily get to them, so 6 feet. With pathways between these racks that are just big enough for a person to get into, and those are all GPUs. There's just tens of thousands of GPUs that are being used to train this stuff. So we're beholden to the people that can afford to set up that kind of infrastructure for us to be able to train these models. So it's definitely something that we're working on. One thing that I think I've observed that I think is kind of interesting for entrepreneurs is that going back to the fact that in order to use something like ChatGPT, I'm just using it as an example, they're all similar, is your ability to make prompts that get you the answer that you want. And there's people who go around and advertise themselves as prompt writing experts, and they can actually charge a pretty good rate for doing that. So what a lot of people have been doing is they've been writing apps for specific purposes, like writing resumes or writing cover letters or some specific purpose. And then they write all the prompts themselves, and then they embed the prompts into the app so that what you do is you click a button on the app, and then internally it generates the prompt and sends it to ChatGPT, so that you wind up with a resume that's satisfactory. And I'm seeing so many variations on that, of people who are writing these apps that basically are just front ends to some of the AI's large language models, and I think that's pretty cool. That's an entrepreneurial thing that people can do without a huge amount of resources. So I just wanted to throw that in, that if you're not a company that can afford to build basketball stadiums full of GPUs, you can actually, with pretty simply write things that do special purpose with writing your own apps. So that's something I wanted to throw in there too. So somebody that's listening to this will go, aha, and they'll write an app and make lots of money. So that's what I want to say now.
Thank you. Professor David, Rob Enderle, what you want to discuss on that particular point, and especially if you give more industrial experience or information that why these are failing, and some of the good software which will be helpful for academia and industry, that may be helpful for our audience.
Sure. First, I want to correct a bunch of things. With regard to Watson Medical, I was assigned to IBM Watson back in the early 2000s, and actually met with the doctors and data scientists that were developing it for medical. The initial tests with Watson Medical were very powerful, and this was prior to deep learning. These were machine learning. So you paired a data scientist with a bunch of doctors, and you created the data set that then trained Watson. Now, what Donald was talking about in terms of the data on the internet, that's referred to as the pile. And the pile is what's used to train a lot of the generative AIs we have today. And it is problematic. It has led to hallucinations. It's led to the problem that Donald highlighted with regard to its use in litigation, where the application fabricated a bunch of cases and fit them into the program, but realized that was a programming error. I bet you would well understand where they were using the creative side of conversational AI to create a particular document. It was really the wrong tool for the process they were trying to use, and because it was trained on the pile, its likelihood of hallucinating was very high. Watson was not trained on the pile. Like, the pile didn't even exist when Watson was trained for medical. So it was hand trained by doctors, and the first test that was done with Watson in medical was against a case that this doctor had created as a trial case, and it was based on his own individual research, where he'd met with a woman 3 years prior who had an undiagnosed disease that was debilitating, and then spent 2 years of his life researching, retesting. She'd been to a bunch of doctors before, and she was in a tremendous amount of pain. In fact, given the amount of pain she was in, I'm kind of surprised she survived the effort, because she'd been doing this for a number of years before she came to the doctor, and he took a number of years to diagnose what was a very rare illness. They fed her symptoms into Watson at the time, and this was early 2000s, and Watson came out with a list of likely diseases. The one she had was number 7. So it would have required them to test up to 20 diseases. So if they did them in order, they would have gotten to 7 and say, that was the one. And it was impressive, because it cut down the time of diagnosis from 2 years, with a dedicated doctor focused in his spare time on the disease, to, I think, 15 minutes to at least come up with a list of things that were likely. And then to do the testing and diagnosis would probably take another month or two to discover the disease they had. So a drop of 2 years with a resource that was not readily available, which meant typically she would not have ever been diagnosed, to 2 months was a positive result. So then why did IBM and Watson kind of get out of the medical side? Well, it had nothing to do with the capability of the product. It had to do with the access to data. The issue they ran into was the fact, and the reason they first came up with federated data was problems they were having is getting access to medical data. They needed to train Watson as broadly as it needed to be trained as a general medical tool. Now, they certainly could have trained it on individual diseases, but the goal was to provide Watson as a general assistant for everybody, but from a general practitioner to a dedicated doctor, a more focused practitioner. So from GP to surgery specialist, and that just became too aggravating. Trying to get through the data that the different the different training hospitals had and the research hospitals had was just too much. And recognize the problem wasn't so much, because with federated data, you could conceal the source and you could get around a lot of the laws that restricted data, though data movement was still a problem, because the different laws in different countries often requires the data must remain and reside, medical data must remain and reside in the country that originated it. So even with federated data, that was somewhat problematic. But the issue was that the research colleges used this information as revenue generating, and they really weren't into providing it so that an AI could provide the same kind of information that they charged for without being able to charge for it. Now, there probably is a mechanism that can be created to provide revenue sharing, but look how that's worked for Google. And I think the hospitals were rightly concerned that if that AI became kind of the Google for medical information, that somehow they were going to get screwed. And if you look at the same model with regard to news services and Google, news services are really kind of suffered as a result of the internet. I mean, a lot of them are barely able to keep their doors open, and many more of them have closed and gone out of business. And these hospitals didn't want to be on that particular list. So the end result is IBM, for the most part, exited the segment. The data access problem was the bridge too far. But from a standpoint of accuracy and capability, Watson performed. It showcased it could do the job if, in fact, it got the data it needed to do it. It was just that data access became problematic on the medical side. And so IBM decided, let's move to an area where the data requirements aren't quite as problematic, and recognize the risks of getting that wrong with data are extreme, because you're rolling against governments, and governments can, basically fine you into obsolescence, as Microsoft found in the early 2000s when they thought they could run against the EU and Interop, and the EU started fining them $1.2 billion a month, and that's not sustainable for anybody. So that was really the story behind it. It worked. The initial tests were fine. The training mechanisms were solid, and recognize that also that IBM has been outspoken on the fact you shouldn't be using the pile to train AIs, because you've got to facilitate the integrity of the training data. Otherwise, you do run into these problems where you're going to get bad advice based on the pile. It is interesting to point out that Elon Musk has been trying to use Twitter's information to spin up his own AI, but given the information on Twitter, I'm thinking if there's ever an AI that's going to go the Terminator route, it'll be his, because that data is by no means the data I'd want an artificial intelligence trained off of. Back to Don's point, that there's an awful lot of information in the pile in the internet that is not only false but incredibly dangerous. And as we saw with Microsoft's chatbot experiment about a decade ago, where it worked, it started out just fine, and then based on the feedback and people just mucking with the tool, it became racist, it became sexist, it became misogynistic. It turned relatively evil relatively fast, which I think was as much a reflection on us as a society as it was on the tool itself, because we did that to Microsoft's chatbot. That wasn't something that was a problem with Microsoft's programming. That was a problem with the people that are interacting with the chatbot. And there are a lot of really sick people out there, whether it was being done for fun or not. It's a serious problem, but it's a problem we need to address with the tool, because we can't have insane AIs floating around, because the outcome's going to be significant. So you do need to focus on the veracity of the training set. You do need to focus on ensuring that you understand the bias that's being introduced into the training set and therefore into the AIs, and then work on mitigating that bias. Now, we have tools to do all of that, and we've actually had tools to do that predate AI significantly. Data research is a science, and doing it properly with proper sampling methods, the proper data assurance methods, and the ability to assure the result. It was all something I was trained in back when I went to school, and that was in the 70s. So the methodologies do exist; they just have to be applied. But back to my original point, that the problem we're experiencing now is just the speed of this thing. It is moving so quickly that the ecosystem is not keeping up, and not even close. And so your ability to be able to tell the difference between an AI that has been properly trained, properly curated, and properly assured, and one that is not non-existent. There is. I was sitting down with a vendor the other day and saying, okay, so what's the benchmarking tool that we have? This is for autonomous cars. So what's the benchmarking tool that we have to assure an autonomous car won't kill you? Because we know that they're good autonomous car programs that have a high degree of veracity, that are accurate, and that will not kill people. And we also know that there are companies, mostly automotive OEMs, that have been cutting an awful lot of corners on the training side. And I'll point to Tesla as a case in point. And have been hyping their technology well before it's ready to drive autonomously, and people are dying. So what tool do we have? And guy said, well, we kind of realized that's a problem, and there are a bunch of us kind of getting together talking about trying to fix the problem, but we don't really have a tool yet. I'm thinking, well, maybe we need to have the tool in place before we start putting this crap on the road, because you really want to know. At least I would want to know as a buyer whether my car is going to kill me or not. And that would certainly inform my decision, but it's not a priority. And the reason it's not a priority is, and this is the case, goes back to client server computing, and even the beginning of computing, is the fact that quality control tends to be an afterthought. It shouldn't be an afterthought, but it tends to be an afterthought. And even IBM has fallen into that particular trap. When I worked there, one of the departments that I was aligned with was the QC department. And I went into a meeting one day, and the head of my unit said, okay, we've decided to get rid of the QC department because they're only telling us what we want to do, what we already know, and they slow down the development process. And as you would expect, the quality in our products cratered, and we went from 92% market share to something like 12% market share in a matter of quarters. It was pretty horrible to watch, and even more horrible to be one of the guys that had raised their hand and say, hey, this is stupid, because you really don't want to be the guy that stands out as being the one that said, yeah, don't do this, it's going to end badly, and then have nobody follow your advice, do it, and it ends badly because they don't really like you hanging around. You're a perfect example of the mistake that they made and the fact that they could have avoided it. But there lies the issue with AI right now, is we're not focused enough on quality. We're not focused on assuring the channel, and we're not focused enough on assuring the result. And the end result is a lot of these results are failing. So we go back to the fact that if I were deploying AI in it right now, my first stop would be NVIDIA, because they know what the hell's going on, or IBM, whichever. But NVIDIA, because they work with a variety of partners, and at least use them as a sounding board to understand, is this something I can do? What are the steps I need to do to assure the project, and become more informed before I make a decision? Because the issue right now is the decision makers aren't informed, and the result is they're making a ton of mistakes. And by the way, I should point out, Jon Stewart the other day, it's worth watching if you get a chance to watch it on his show. He kind of went off on AI, among other things. But his points were well taken. Some of the points were well taken, and one of them was that AI is currently being focused mostly. He started off by saying, we're told that AI is going to solve climate change, and AI is going to solve global hunger. But where we see AI focused is on replacing people with automation, which is going to create a problem. And he's right. It's going to create a huge problem. And why is AI being focused on replacing workers right now? Well, because we've got severe worker shortages at the moment. One of the areas where we never thought AI was going to play was fast food. One of the areas where AI is now playing an increasingly huge role is in fast food. Now, the reason is they can't get people. Now, I could certainly argue one of the reasons they can't get people is not paying them enough, but that's beside the point. So they're looking at AI to fix that particular problem. And don't get me wrong, it will. In fact, it's interesting to note the one place they want to put AI is on the fry station, because if you're working in fast food, where most of the injuries are and where people have to be sent home to recover, is working on fries. Apparently, it's incredibly dangerous. Who knew? But the end result is we're focusing on AI in areas where we're going to create more problems. We start displacing a whole lot of workers, we're going to have real issues, because how these people are going to eat. Homelessness will go through the roof. The socio-economic problems will be disastrous short term, and AI is not focused on solving those problems. AI is tactically focused on solving one kind of a labor problem, and the end result, it's going to have a collateral damage issue, unintended consequence of creating another huge problem of massive amounts of unemployed people that are probably unemployable. So his point is, well, maybe we ought to force fit AI against the problems we really need AI to focus on, which are things like climate change, solving some of the global medical issues that we've got. And I would argue, much going back to IBM's original promise of where AI should be focused, which is not as an employee replacement, but as an employee assistant. And then who needs the most assistance? Well, if a line employee makes a mistake, yeah, it may be bad. You may lose a customer, you may lose a product. But if the CEO makes a mistake, you may lose the company. And I would argue that probably this assistance needs to be applied more at the top than at the bottom at the moment, if it's going to be applied in the way to avoid costly mistakes. Because the cost is far higher, the cost of the mistake is far higher at the top than the cost of the mistake at the bottom. More important, if you were to replace all the CEOs in the world with AIs, you wouldn't have a labor problem. I mean, it's a handful of folks that are consuming an exorbitant amount of resource. So the end result is you might actually get a more positive benefit, assuming the AI is viable and can do the job, than if you replace the rank and file workers. Your benefit would be more assured, and there's less of a chance of massive unemployment collateral damage. But that's not where we are. Where we are is we're focusing AI tactically. It's focused on replacing people where there are hiring shortages. It is focused a bit on replacing people that are in dangerous jobs, which is an appropriate place to focus it. Really mining jobs are not things that people should be doing. And there are a lot of jobs that are so dangerous, like line maintenance, that probably we should have robots doing those jobs as opposed to people. But other jobs that people are doing just fine on and remaining employed and at least reasonably happy are probably areas where AI shouldn't have the priority, and instead we should be focusing on areas where AI could make a huge difference. Like, for instance, One of the things I did, and the reason I was late, I was talking about the fact that electric vehicles are not doing well at the moment. And the reason they're not doing well, according to the Edmunds research, is that they're too expensive, and that the car makers are not supplying the vehicles that people actually want to buy. Well, that's a mistake. That is a mistake that a data-based AI can address. They can look at an overall population. They can look at the surveys that are being captured. They can look at market dynamics, and they can come up with a recommendation that will delineate what kind of products you should deliver at what price points in order to be successful. Now, you could ignore the advice, but at least they can provide it so that the car OEMs can follow it and maybe solve the problem. But now, look at a car OEM. And I'm going to use this example, and I'll pass back to Don because I've been going on for a while. If you look at Ford's having a significant problem. They came up with the F-150 Lightning, and if you look at it on paper, it looks like the perfect vehicle for a truck driver. So why isn't it doing well? Well, one, it's $92,000 fully configured when you can buy a decent F-150 for less than half of that. People had to wait for a lot of months, and they needed a truck in those months when they were waiting for the vehicle. And the problems of the vehicle have kind of overcome its benefits over time because they're under marketing the product. And so these problems are creating. Oh, by the way, and the populace is very staid, not very technology forward. Your pickup truck driver is kind of a Luddite, so they're not really excited about electric trucks except for the initial group. So an AI, or actually any individual that understands market dynamics, would have said, okay, here are the steps you need to go through to be successful with your pickup truck. One of them is pricing has to be corrected, and number two is you've got to create a core group of advocates, your initial buyers, and allow them to convince the rest of the population to move, which is exactly what Ford didn't do. And the end result is now they're in a bit of trouble with a lot of unsold F-150 Lightnings, and a lot of concern that the electric car market is going to fail in the U.S. Yet you go to China and it's going friggin' vertical, with BYD coming from nowhere and actually passing Tesla in terms of overall sales over a very short period of time, though their quality kind of sucks. So does Tesla. So go figure. But the end of the day, where AI really should be focused is as an assistant right now, as a way to provide advice and help people from making mistakes that they otherwise would make, and not in terms of mass use of mass employee displacement, because that second path is going to create problems we are not at all prepared to deal with. And yeah, it may to a certain extent be easier or seem easier, but that's only because we're not taking into account those secondary costs. Yeah, the companies don't pay for massive unemployment, but we as a society do, and that makes it problematic. So if you get a chance to see the John Stewart piece from Monday, it's worth watching. He makes a number of really good arguments with regard to AI focus. And by the way, his later discussion with the head of the FTC is also worth watching. That was also fascinating, though I did think in that particular case he was a bit wrong-headed. So now I'll pass.
Thank you. Mr. Donald, how we can develop better policy for AI to solving all of the complex problem what we discussed today?
Well, we have to understand what AI is good for. And I think it's an interesting thing that I think that Ron and I have really different sources for where we get our information. Because, for instance, I just looked it up right now, and it said that the EV market for the third quarter of 2023, well, basically better overall. EV sales in 2023 increased nearly 50%. There are about 8% of new cars sold nationwide, and 25% of cars in California are EVs. So that doesn't sound to me like something that's failing, but maybe I'm missing something. And the other is, I just went back and I looked.
You're missing the first quarter numbers. First quarter has been in the toilet. Tesla's down 23%. Ford is
Tesla shot itself in the foot, so that's not a reasonable.
Well, but they're the bellwether for electric. So they're down 23. Ford F-150s are. If you look up on the internet, you'll see pictures of fields of Ford F-150 Lightnings unsold. So this quarter has been really bad.
Okay, well, I'll continue to research that, but we're about to buy an electric car, and everyone in my neighborhood's getting electric cars, but we're not buying Fords because nobody. I haven't even considered buying a Ford in my adult life. After Toyotas came along, it pretty much crushed. We get Toyotas and Hondas, but the Kia has actually got a huge, really, really good rating in Consumers Report. So
the new Genesis is awesome, but that new Genesis electric is just an awesome car.
Yeah, that's what I think we're going to probably get. But regardless, and I had subscribed to this journal. It's called New England Journal of Medicine, Artificial Intelligence. They have and it's very, very, very technical. And so one of the things that I think people kind of don't realize that the kind of breakthrough AI, which is deep learning, is really what it's doing is it's a very sophisticated way of coming up with averages. And so it's not thinking in any way. There's nothing in it that has any relationship to human cognition at all. I mean, it's just not. It works a completely different way. And so if you're looking at something like a medical diagnosis, it's super good for things like, say, for instance, spotting lung cancer. It's better than a radiologist. And why would that be? It's because it could look at lots and lots and lots of lungs. Some of them have a few of them have lung cancer, and most of them don't. And so what it can do then is it can start noticing from the average of all these lungs what is different than the average. And then you can then train it to say, well, this particular difference is actually an average of what people who have lung cancer have. So from the average healthy lung to an unhealthy lung, it can look at the particular unhealthiness and say that on average, that unhealthiness is lung cancer. And with enough data, you can train it so it gets very, very accurate. I will again point out that we have enough trouble ourselves deciding whether something's true or not, and we don't have an algorithm yet for doing that. I mean, I've researched that quite a bit, and so I want to also mention something is that in 1945, Norbert Wiener, who's invented the term cybernetics and basically invented cybernetics, wrote a book called he wrote a book called Cybernetics. He also wrote The Human Use of Human Beings, but that was later. He wrote a book called Cybernetics, and in the introduction to the second edition of Cybernetics, he discusses the potential problems of machines replacing people as laborers. And he has a line in that I just has been in my mind ever since, which is he said that if people are competing with mechanical slaves for jobs, what are they competing to be? And so if we have things that we can do that a mindless robot can do or a mindless AI, is it really a good idea to try and preserve the jobs? I mean, is it even really fair to people to have them do jobs that there's really no purpose, no point for them doing? Because it'd be like somebody toasting things over a fire instead of using a toaster or something. I mean, we could theoretically do all those things, but it's not. It doesn't seem very fair to people to do it. So I'm not concerned that you can replace fast food workers, because fast food work is a miserable job, because every maybe 20th person is going to be an insufferable asshole whose only point being there is to make your day as miserable as possible. And that's all they want to do. And so you have to put up with that all day. It's not very fun for practically no pay. And anyway, and I also want to throw in that when you read The Economist or something like that, they're always on about how we can never predict what jobs are going to be created by the fact of old jobs going away. Like it reshuffles, people come up with things. And an example is back to what I just said. There's people who are writing these apps and seemingly doing well enough that do nothing but leverage the ability of Chat GTP and things like that. So people are creating tons of stuff now based on this, and we don't even know where that's going to go. That's the beautiful kind of innovation, the kind of stuff where just people in their garages are doing stuff, and you just, oh fuck, I wish I would have thought of that. It's so obvious, but oh well. And so anyway, I think that the biggest problem is some of the biggest main things. The reason that it's difficult is that we project, we anthropomorphize things, and we say, okay, well, this is artificial intelligence or learning and all these things, and we think, well, I know what that is. I mean, I'm relatively intelligent and I know how to learn, so the computers must be doing the same thing. But they're not. These are metaphorically learning, and they're metaphorically intelligent, but they're not actually, I mean, they're not learning in anything that resembles what humans do. And so people who aren't like I worked in an AI company, and the people who were making the models and things like that were kind of difficult to talk to. I think they might, generously might have been on the spectrum a bit, and those aren't the people that are going to go out and like look at some human problem. I mean, we've had enough experience. Rob certainly has had enough experience of knowing that when somebody starts a company that might be successful, the first thing that you want to know when you're listening to them is, what problem are you solving? And that's absolutely it. What problem are you solving? And so what winds up happening is that people think, well, AI is going to solve all these problems, but the people who see the problems that are going to be solved and the people who are actually programming it are very different people. It's been this way probably since they started using rocks as tools. I'm sure there were the people who were really good at using rocks and the people that were really good at figuring out what they could be used for, and they probably couldn't talk to each other. I mean, that's a known. I mean, they can talk to each other, but you have to put a lot of effort into it. And so, so I think that basically there's an old thing that's a worn out thing, which is over promising and under delivering. And I think it'll be a process of us just kind of really understanding what it is good at, and more people understanding what it's good at, because as Rob pointed out, this all happened very, very fast. And so people, in marketing areas and kind of areas where they can do market research, it's not necessarily clear exactly what you're going to research relative to what it is that you can actually develop. And so it's becoming more and more, it will become more clear, and then we're going to find out we're sort of wrong about what we thought, and we're going to keep iterating. And there's a lot of good stuff that's going to be happening from it, but people have, the basic simple thing is that people weren't really clear on what we can do with it. And so they speculate on what they can do with it and then promise that they're going to do these speculative things and found out, well, I guess we can't actually do that. So I think it's common. I'm old enough to remember this happening through PCs and all, even I was even around when minis started. So I've seen this. It's just a normal thing in the technology process. It's not even specific to AIs. So that's
Thank you.
what I have to say.
What you want to discuss with the and what's your closing remarks?
Sure. Yeah, a couple things on some of the things that Donald said. One of it, you reminded me of one time I was in IBM marketing, and a guy came in and said, "Okay, we're handing you the responsibility to develop a marketing plan for this product." And I looked at the product and I said, "Well, who's the customer?" I read the spec sheet for the product. We spent $20 million creating it, and I said, "Okay, so you want me to develop a marketing plan? Who's the customer for this product?" And he looked at me and says, "Well, if that's something you need to know to do your job, then you need to go find that out." I'm going, "Yeah, I'm not touching." Handed it back to him and said, "Yeah, I'm not touching it with somebody else's 10-foot pole." And so they handed it to one of my peers, and she did a $20,000 study and discovered there was no customer for the product. They spent $20 million developing something that there was nobody that wanted to buy it. Not an uncommon problem. And as we look at this AI wave, the one of the big issues that I'm seeing at the moment is people are jumping to the tool before they fully understand the problem. And another ongoing joke right now going around is, "Oh my God, AI is going to take our jobs as programmers," and the other person in the conversation says, "Yeah, but they've got to be able to describe what it is they want, and users have never been able to do that, so our jobs are safe." I'm not sure that's the mitigating factor that would give me a great deal of comfort, but the end result is right now people are rushing to AI as the solution without fully defining what the problem is yet. I mean, it's CEOs are going, "Well, where are we with AI deployment?" Well, what kind of problem are you trying to solve with it? I mean, you start with the problem, you back into the tool. You don't start with the tool and try to force it into every problem. And if you do it ass backwards, you're going to pick the wrong tool. It's, you pick up a screwdriver and say, "Let's go fix whatever is broken." Well, chances are it's not going to work well if you need a hammer, or you need pliers, or you need a wrench. So it's the right tool for the right task. And as Donald pointed out, right now where a lot of the activity is, are people taking these LLMs, they're subsegmenting them into SLMs, small language models, which take a component of the LLM that addresses a particular problem, focuses on the problem, and it does those individual problems reasonably well, depending on how the information is curated. Now, recognize that if that LLM or that large language model is corrupt in any way, and you take it into an SLM, there's a chance that corruption is going to flow across. So you still have to mitigate any problems with the language model, but it's easier because you're more focused. You're not taking something that's trying to do everything for everyone. Instead, you're taking something that's trying to do one specific thing for one person, and it's a lot easier to define the problem that way. And as a result, it's a lot easier to build the tool. But you want to start off with a problem. What is it you want to solve? If the problem is you're not able to keep your fast food organization staffed, that's a problem. And don't get me wrong, the early testing on that actually worked well. I think we've got at least one McDonald's and one other chain has spun up a fully automated shop, and it's working okay. I mean, it's 24/7. It's up. There've been some abuses. You do kind of have to supply some kind of security because people can abuse standalone computer operations, much like we've seen them abuse ATMs. But the result is it is workable. It does address the underlying problem. You do have to address the human interface to the store, which still needs a bit of work. But you can get it done. But you start with the problem. What is the problem it is you're trying to solve, and then you develop a solution against the problem. This is what we need. But if you don't do it that way, you start with, well, we need AI, and everybody else is doing AI, and they're making AI customer facing, and so we're going to get rid of all our call centers. We're going to AI. There was one shop that I think they got rid of 80% of their employees and decided they're going to replace them with AI. That's not playing all that well against their brand. Hard to tell if it's working, but my odds are it's not. Oh, by the way, if you're ever into Twilight Zone, there's a Twilight Zone episode where and this is back in I think 50s, early 60s, where the exact thing happens. The CEO comes in and he's on this automated bent, and he automates all the workers, and then he automates all the support staff, and he finally automates his MIS guy, now called IT, back then it was Management Information Systems. And then at the end of the program, Robbie the robot comes walking in and replaces the CEO, and he's lamenting in a bar talking about how his job went away. Well, that one I would argue was an unintended consequence to his process of deciding that employees were pointless. The point to make is you've got to understand the problem. You've got to understand the solution that you're trying, in other words, the goal you're trying to accomplish. And then you come up with a plan to implement a technology that does the job you need done. But if you don't do that groundwork first, and if you don't understand the tools first, then the end result's going to be a disaster. And that's to a large extent why a lot of this stuff is failing. The mechanism to assure success just doesn't exist yet, and for a lot of folks. And until that mechanism exists, we're going to have a lot of issues. Donald pointed out that's been going on for a while. It goes back to client-server computing. And I'll end with this. Back when client-server computing came out back in the mid-'80s, everybody, including IBM, agreed it was the future. IBM did not have a client-server solution at the time. And to a large extent, that was one of the, and I wrote the paper inside IBM, that's why IBM nearly went under. One of the reasons was that IBM pivoted to client-server computing before they even had a solution. And by the way, today, mainframes are still their most valuable, most profitable platform. Not client-server. But they agreed, along with everybody else, that client-server was the future. And here's the funny part of this. It wasn't until 1994 that the stuff actually worked. Everybody was running around saying, client-server computing, you got to deploy client-server computing, we're going in. But these deployments weren't working at all. They were breaking, they weren't reliable. In most cases, they were failing back over to their mid-range and mainframe computers to actually get work done. But everybody was so embarrassed about the fact that none of this stuff was working. Nobody was talking about it. And so it wasn't until 1994 that we went back and did a survey and discovered that all this crap that people were raving about, the entire foundation for Sun Microsystems was bullshit. None of it worked. In fact, it got so crazy in the 90s, Oracle came to market with a database product that fundamentally didn't run. By the way, by the time anybody figured that out, they'd fixed it. It was running. Otherwise, Ellison wouldn't be one of the richest guys. He'd be one of the folks still in jail. That goes back to the fake it till you make it methodology that took out a medical company just a little while ago. Almost took out Apple, and certainly would have taken out Next if it hadn't been absorbed by Apple back in the day. But that's not uncommon. This idea of pitching something before it's ready and people jumping on it before they understand it. If you want to fix this and actually be successful, you've got to fix that. You start with a problem, you back into the product, and you make sure that you have internal expertise to understand the technology before you pull the switch. If you don't do it in that order, it's going to end really badly. And from what we understand from studies, 90% of them are ending really badly at the moment. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Donald, and thank you, Mr. Rob, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care.
Bye, nice to see you, Rob.
Hey, same, it's been a while.